teaching, writing, directing theater. And then so I was teaching at the college level, public speaking, and then I moved into corporate training, which I totally adore, because I'm not being hassled about grades and stalked by angry students. And so I have a certification in emotional intelligence, and I do a lot of subcontracting in a sort of an edutainment kind of capacity. So I get hired by companies like the Mind Gym that, if you know the Mind Gym, they do 90-minute workouts on all different kinds of communication topics. And then I do public speaking training downtown in Chicago. I do team building, all of those things. But I was very excited to come today because today was a representation of nonfiction and fiction coming together. And to be able to share some of what I studied as a screenwriter and a playwright, and see how it applies to as a template for storytelling for in the corporate world. And I guess the piece about me is that I am part of a Joseph Campbell study group in Wheaton, Illinois. I've been studying Joseph Campbell's work for a long time, and we'll see if who's familiar with Joseph Campbell.
So you're following your bliss, huh?
Well, that could be a long conversation about what he really meant by that. I was in grad school, and so I was in my 20s, and I was a teaching assistant, and I was not used to, let's just turn this off now. I was not used to presenting, and I was presenting on Charlie Chaplin to a group of theater students. I was in a big auditorium. They were below me, and I was very nervous, and I had a pen in my hand. I was playing with a pen as I spoke. And I was going along, it was an hour lecture, and I looked down, and there's a student below me, and she's going like this. And then, of course, I look, and my hands are covered in ink. And I've been putting it all over my face during the lecture. And I was mortified, as you are at 20, whatever. And somehow bumbled through the last bit of the lecture and left humiliated. And it was only years later when I thought about the perfection of what I had done, speaking about Charlie Chaplin, doing Charlie Chaplin's shtick. That was Chaplin all over the place.
Yeah. And you've heard it earlier.
But instead of welcoming, and I know you facilitators are brilliant at welcoming what's really happening in the room and accepting my own imperfections, I had this image of the perfect presentation and totally ignored the richness of what had happened. And when I teach public speaking now, as I will in a few weeks down here for a 2-day awesome class, if you want any 2 days of intense public speaking training, I always tell that story because I think one of the things as speakers we really have to, I know I'm constantly working on it, is making peace, making friends with imperfection. And that most speech anxiety has to do with this desire to be perfect, this perfect image. And so for me, that's a story, that's a keeper story that I love to tell. It reminds me about the power of imperfection. And training students for decades, well, maybe a decade, I'm not that old, but it was the imperfection that was most interesting. It was when they messed up that you really got the soul coming through. And the perfect was soulless. So that's my story to start with. So that was my my story. That was my reminder to tell you that. How, your idea of using stories for the executives to sort of understand.
Some very complex designs.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see how what I'm talking about applies, and certainly fascinated to see if it can apply for sales. Because I'm not sure. Because my focus is on inspiring. I want to inspire people to not worry about being perfect. And I'm going to keep proving that fact by being imperfect, probably to you tonight. We'll look at Campbell's Hero's Journey as a template that I've read, and I think this is very true, that his template ensures that your story is going to be universal and it's going to rock the other person. It's a story that is going to land for the other person. And then a little bit of time to talk about your own stories, to think about your own stories, and then maybe end with some of my ideas about best practices of storytelling. So we can talk today about fiction and nonfiction, fictional and non-fictional characters. I've got a mix of characters there, but why don't you just take a moment to talk to the person next to you and tell them about someone, fictional or real, that inspired you in the past or inspires you now. I want to ask you another question now is, and I think it's really good to be very specific here, if you can, is who do you want to inspire? And what do you want to inspire them to think, feel, or do? And I'd love to hear an answer. Let's hear your thoughts on that. Who do you want to inspire specifically? Who would you like to inspire?
My kids.
Through a story. Your kids.
One of the things that I want to inspire is to engage people in joining in to the amazing work that's happening on the west side of Chicago, dealing with youth violence in Englewood and Lawndale, and looking to see what can middle-class white people go in and do, or upper middle-class white people go in and do, and kind of how to find the connections and the ways that we can create bridges and we can connect. Because there's amazing stuff going on down there, and somehow we want to do something, but we don't know what to do or how to approach and how to engage.
Every movie and every story, every novel, every movie, well, let's just stay with the movies for a moment, that really lands generally follows the hero's journey, both comedies and tragedies, and so those images that I had earlier of the Wizard of Oz and Matrix and of course Star Wars, and they all follow this. So Campbell discovered or rediscovered that stories do follow this pattern, starting with the call to adventure. So, do you remember the call to adventure in The Matrix?
Which one do you want?
Oh yeah, and even before that, he gets something on his computer that says,
Knock, knock.
what about The Wizard of Oz?
She starts following the.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
she's restless in Kansas.
And she runs away from home?
Exactly.
Okay, so we all have calls to adventure constantly in our lives. Inner calls and outer calls. So we lose our job, or we get sick, or we get promoted, we get married, when small things happen. So I felt a call to create this program, an inner call. Certain things happen in my life, and so I thought, I guess I'm going to do it. I often have these inner calls. I should do this thing. So we can think and we can talk about the call as a part of the story. this is a whole movie, and this could be a whole keynote. I'm not sure that we're going to tell the whole hero's journey when we stand up to tell a story, but we may tell portions. We may talk about the call, the moment of the call. And Campbell talks about the refusal of the call, the struggling with the call. And then threshold guardians, which is a very interesting part of the journey where somebody comes, a bureaucrat, in my case, usually a bureaucrat, blocking my way. The threshold guardian wants to make sure you're ready for the journey. And once I started seeing bureaucrats as threshold guardians, I wasn't quite so frustrated with them anymore. They had a mythic role in my life.
Everybody liked that. That's their role in any kind of journey.
That's right. And so, in The Wizard of Oz, the threshold guardians, what were some of the threshold guardians that she encountered that stopped her from, that threatened to stop her from the journey?
Flying bats.
The flying bats or those trees? And then the main journey involves meeting the helper, meeting the mentor, and then going through the struggles. And I have this on a handout to you guys. This thing. The challenges and the temptations. You were talking about Peace Pilgrim and the struggles of Gandhi, the struggles of Abraham Lincoln, the struggling moments.
Ulysses.
Oh yeah, 10 years of struggle. And then the abyss and the death. And in comedy, you know, the moment where I wipe ink all over my face is a comic death. So sharing our foibles and our failures is what is inspiring. And I don't know how that relates to some of what we were talking about. But Campbell's journey is about death and then transformation. So the story has to contain some death. That moment of all is lost. Every story we love has that moment of all is lost. And if you can share that moment with someone, we all have those moments constantly in our lives where we feel all is lost. And it isn't, and that's the beautiful thing. So what are you thinking about this model for what we're talking about in terms of inspiring?
I think it's very powerful to me. And then when I think about corporate change or team change, where we introduce processes, team building processes, and constructs that may avoid that loss, which makes the process less powerful. In other words, you put things together so that it all flows, and maybe we shouldn't do it so smooth. Maybe it should be designed so that there is the it is in a way that I have to put it in this context.
Nice. I've recently been thinking about when people are frustrated in a training or even upset, that I really should reframe that as, I mean, certainly it could be my fault. I could be screwing up big time. Or they got pushed to a limit and it didn't feel too good because change is hard and changing thought patterns is hard. Maybe it was totally right. Maybe it was totally right on. So I think knowing the hero's journey for myself and maybe sharing the hero's journey with people in training, because I guess the other thing that I love about this model is that everything in life becomes meaningful then, because it's somewhere on that journey. So when things are really going wrong, oh, I'm on a hero's journey. I'm taking the
It
hero's.
seems like our culture really tries to design environments to keep people away from feeling uncomfortable. And we have ways of sort of creating this norm that if something's uncomfortable or messy, that there's something wrong, and you've got to fix it.
Yeah.
And what this does is it really normalizes it, and it sort of says, you're fine. You know, just stay in there, stay present, sit in the fire, and let that, you know, let what's trying to emerge, rather than bypass it and go to cleaning it up real quick. So there's a balance between, lingering for too long and then just bypassing it completely. So there's some kind of art to that, and it's definitely having a view like that creates, having a view of your own, what you're doing or what you're doing with your team within that hero's journey creates a context for resilience. We're in a tough spot or we're in a great spot. There's a context for all of it that allows it to keep moving rather than getting contracted and stuck and stumped.
And if we're in touch with living our own hero's journey, then we can speak with a story about there was a time I remember when I felt all was lost, and here's what happened, and here's how I overcame that, or at least survived it.
And that's empathy, yeah?
Right. Yeah, thanks for that E word that was in the description, because sharing, the cool thing about this is the universality of it, and that's why it creates empathy, and that's why when Jim says, I always mess it up, I immediately feel a sense of connection to him, because I recognize my own many mess-ups, which feels like this to me. Every time I do a training where I mess up something, which is every training, which feels like this. So there's a great deal of empathy between us. We're on very different journeys, incredibly different journeys, but we just connected in that moment because he shared a vulnerability. And that's sort of where I'm going with this, that you guys, I want your feedback on it. We're constantly on the journey, and the transformation for Campbell is the hero brings back the boon, brings back the gift because of the journey. The gift of empathy, the gift of compassion, the gift of wisdom, knowledge, or other superhero gifts.
In the sales model, I actually worked with some sales reps and had the customer be the hero. They were the one that needed to bring the solution back to, once they bought into the product, then they carry that back to the organization, whether it was equipment or medicine or what have you. They help them realize that they're the hero and then help.
So my favorite story about Google is the Penguin Award that they have, which is supposedly penguins in the wild watch each other, and when one dives down to fish, if he doesn't come back, they go, let's get out of here. It's not safe for us. The Penguin Award is Google gives, right, you go first. The Penguin Award is, we're going to give the person who made the biggest error, and it might be the most costliest error to the company, we're going to give them an award. We're going to honor failure that much. We're going to say there's such a benefit for going through this. An idea that is on here, and it starts with remembering a darker time in our own career path. That's one option if you want to inspire a team, and sharing that part of your journey and what good came out of that moment. So in the middle of this page are those questions. If you want to try to think of a moment to share with someone that would be part of that darker part of the hero's journey. And above that I have, thinking about who is your audience questions. And so for the rest of our time, I thought if you wanted to think about that, write about that, share it with a partner, some people could share it. It would be sharing a story based on this, and then I have a few final words on best practices of storytelling. Actually, I think I want to give you some of those best practices first. Unless you're doing a keynote, a single event is probably easier to tell. I prefer to tell comic stories, and so the dark moment is usually something at my expense. You know, it's not like heavy.
Okay.
Even though in the moment I felt all was lost. I think part of this is just thinking through our lives. We're culling our lives for stories now, right? We're culling our lives for stories in this template. So when I was thinking about this, I remembered working in a company where some of the employees I felt started to collude against me. That gossipy political thing I walked into unawares. I felt all was lost. I was going to quit. That was a dark moment. But in terms of storytelling, good storytelling, the art of storytelling is the art of the details. How many details to share? Too many is overwhelming. Not enough leaves us not really following. So that's part of the reason why we practice even personal stories. So if you practice on somebody right now sitting next to you, you're going to learn through that practice a better way to tell that story. You're going to go, and your partner may tell you, I didn't quite understand, or I need more details there. So I practice my personal stories a lot, even though they happen to me. Storytelling is the art of the details, so you can't get around practicing. Personally, what I tell students, you can't get around practicing out loud, because in your head is just totally different. It's a different beast. You know that as trainers. So if you're ready, partner up, and yeah, you're there.
So the whole concept of storytelling is it's interesting, and that's what brought me here. But it's not just here's a methodology for storytelling. I really got a lot out of everyone else's input that added in, whether it was a personal, what you did for your class. You were saying how, in the corporate world, just your internal, whatever it was. Somehow it weaves a really nice cloth that I can take away and take the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for saying that. Our brains are wired for story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've done a lot of studies so that they know that stories, as many of you have already said, they're they're the way to influence, because the brain, it impacts us emotionally, empathetically, and we remember stories because of how our brains are wired. So that's
what I appreciate greatly, in addition to the structure, is your energy in facilitating this process. I trusted it. My thought is that my story would be different, and I would not have told it had I not felt comfortable. And I work in situations where if folks don't feel comfortable, two things happen. They don't tell their story, and other people assume what their story is. And those with privilege who assume and act change the lives of people who don't have a chance to speak their own truth. So comfort in a setting where I can speak my own truth and my own voice means everything to me. So thank you for that.
Thanks. And I think, I felt everybody sharing, Jack, Jim, sharing failure just makes everybody feel better. We're safe. We don't have to pretend to be perfect anymore. That's a good place to end, huh? Yeah.